Episode 2, Part 2. A psychologist may state that a person will succeed if he pursues his purpose or goal with discipline. However, while it is laudable to advocate discipline, habits, or principles for success, how does one summon the requisite psychological metal to focus and press on as desired? It is barely enough to admonish self-control. What levers do I hold, or what faculties do I weigh upon to achieve such control? A close friend of mine, knowing my keen interest in these matters, sent me a striking extract of an email. Whomever the author of that email is, this could not have been stated more palpably. It pinpoints man's deep-seated desire to have the fog of opaqueness lifted off whatever his inner workings might be. Let me quote you part of that email. You people are telling me what you think I want to know. I want to know what is actually happening. Become aware of internal, subjective, subverbal experiences so that those experiences can be brought into the world of abstraction, of conversation, of naming, etc. With the consequence that it immediately becomes possible for a certain amount of control to be exerted over those hitherto unconscious or uncontrollable processes. In other words, implicit in the poise of modern psychology is the supposition that the psyche is a known entity. That is something we clearly know. We reference the psyche, nod our heads, and proceed like we fully understand what we are talking about or articulating. However, candid scrutiny reveals only vague hints of some imprecise or nondescript phenomenon to which a psychologist may have privileged access. I challenge you to indicate in an unambiguous manner what the psyche is. I am afraid the attempt wouldn't get further than some woolly, circuitous wording. In any case, conventional psychology does not precisely indicate what the psyche is or what it constitutes. As such, conventional psychology barely sheds light on how to exercise control over one's interiority for wholesome self-direction. Notable literature on psychoanalysis or psychotherapy leans a lot on observing patients or their case histories to demonstrate what constitutes normal or healthy attitudes and behavior. The book by Dr. Thomas Harris, referenced above, as well as The Road Less Traveled by Dr. Scott Peck, exhibits such nuance of more or less extrapolating normality from dysfunction. And whereas that approach tends to consider persons who acknowledge having problem with themselves and are likely benign or harmless to those around them, it scarcely contemplates seemingly normal people who are not only a problem to themselves but are often a danger to others. Their personal disorders, while ordinarily glossed over, are often fateful for other people as well. Let me share with you this intriguing story that my relative told me. The experience was narrated to him by his Germany friend. The Germany lad was reluctant to visit his father, who was hospitalized. The father, sick on a hospital bed, remarked thus to his son, who had been disinclined to visit him. The sick people are not the ones you see here in hospital or loitering along streets, possibly naked and picking from dustbins. The truly sick people are the ones you see rushing off to work, so busy with one thing or the other. Sadly, the sentiment holds a ring of truth. Benjamin Ferencz and Ken Keyes, in their book Planethood, put it this way regarding those who planned as well as those who executed the unspeakable Nazi cruelty. Though many Nazi atrocities were carried out by nothing less than sadists or professional criminals, those who conceived and directed the extermination programs were quite different. I was shocked to learn that almost all of them were educated men who seemed quite normal. They loved their families, were kind to cats and dogs, enjoyed Wagner's music, and could quote Goethe's poetry. In fact, many of them, I'm ashamed to say, were lawyers. I hope you note the sharp contrast between these observations by Ferencz and Keyes and then the views by Pendant, whom we referenced earlier in this episode. That sharp contrast brings to the fore two intellect issues. What is the underpinning of man's humanity, and what is the basis of his normality? As I explored these conjoined issues, I happened to present this hurdle to a youthful medical doctor. If reality is a vital tool of treatment, as any psychologist would indicate, what are the grounds or basis of man's normality? Perhaps a map, a yardstick, or some element that we may fall back on for healthful self-adjustment and wholesome self-direction. The young doctor went on to sketch this graph. What followed was a simple explanation. Anybody falling between -5 and +5 is normal. Those who lie between the mean O and X are supernormal, and those who fall within the shaded areas would be abnormal. This schema would of course require an appropriate scaling system to allow for results that are comparable universally. We could decide on 10 or 20 attributes, each assigned an index or indicator. Now, here is a fundamental criticism of the kind of viewpoint represented by the foregoing graph. We cannot tell with certainty who is or isn't normal by simply scrutinizing this kind of indicators or statistics. While that sort of schema may, as it seems, apply in a narrow, controlled environment, its validity, given the complexity of human existence, is improbable. A simple instance: a petty thief, maybe a chicken snatcher, is apprehended in the context of such a normal curve, conceivably informed by a given social or cultural outlook. Yet, some people are lawless, but they live in the mainstream rather than the fringes of society. They hardly appear to be psychologically conflicted and take life in their stride. It's possible then for many people to be in a state of aberrance and yet live heedless of the fact, since the entire neighborhood would be in the sway of a given hang-up. In that case, the normal person might be the one who does not conform to the general mindset. As to where the sort of graphs or statistics referred to above can hardly be a benchmark regarding healthy or unhealthy behavior. Additionally, we may ask, wouldn't prescribed notions of normality based on such statistics render us close-minded to the seemingly unfamiliar yet indisputable ways of life? There is also the danger of crass expediency or self-centeredness when one group of people views other folks via such set notions of normality. For example, crediting special abilities or character flaws to a given race, gender, class, or tribe. When Timothy Payne, a Christian writer, visited apartheid South Africa, he was shocked to find that the segregating mentality had as powerful a hold on the minds of evangelicals as it did on the armed forces. He said that he could have denounced the white-led charismatic churches there, but instead he considered that if he had grown up in South Africa, he probably would have been like the other church members. And because they cherished many of the values he treasured, he concluded that they were not bad, but blind. Not bad, but blind. Blind, that sounds like a fitting description. A conformist sort of aberrance, I would add. Here is the kind of thinking that sustains the said frame of mind. Because virtually all the people around a given individual hold the same attitudes or behave in a similar manner, the individual, as well as his acquaintances, can hardly perceive what might be wrong with the prevailing mentality. They don't incline to intuitively question or call out such mentality, hence the conformist sort of aberrance. It is that anomaly or split in arguably decent people that I take issue with in this series. It is by that sort of anomaly that educated men and women orchestrated Nazi atrocities. It is the same curious split that underlies gender bias. It is by the same dim sight that a school in the United States of America, USA, in the 1950s attempted to bar a young black woman from attending a whites-only school. It is the same split we see when a farm owner throws a laborer into a lion's den. It is a related handicap that drives someone to poke the muzzle of a gun at a prisoner's private parts. And this was said to happen in an area deemed religious or compassionate. it is the same anomaly that inclines a woman, wife to a judge, to engage in the physical and psychological battle of a housemaid or house help. Still, how come a person considered a good teacher by parents and pupils detonates a bomb in town, maiming commuters and killing others? What would we say of a physician with the dark obsession of dragging his patients to slow death, as was discovered in the United Kingdom years back? What of the European or Asian governments that have, at one time or another, mowed down their citizens, such as the haunting brutality in Cambodia? What of the colonial excesses and then the dishonor by African regimes of their peoples in the wake of independence? A cargo ship from a wealthy Western country delivers tons of toxic waste upon the shores of a poor African country, causing over a dozen deaths and rendering thousands ill. What of the ancient hatreds and prejudices that play out in the modern era, with pogroms directed at ethnic groups, including the menace of poison gas or threats of extermination? Then there are these scars: the 1994 Rwanda genocide, the 1995 Srebrenica massacres in Europe, and then 2004 Beslan school tragedy in Russia. None of the incidents or events I have mentioned above is fiction. None of it is invention. As previously indicated, these cruelties and indignities point to how seemingly normal people are not only a problem to themselves, but are often a danger to others. The iniquity and cruelty beg for an answer. Where is man's humanity? I closely followed the soul-searching on some TV episodes after the Columbine high school shooting in Colorado, USA many years back. It was probably the first mass school shooting the world over. Now, there were several sorts of observations and proposed solutions regarding the incident, including, for instance, the need for tougher firearm laws and more care for isolated groups of alienated youngsters from broken homes. It was also observed that we have failed to love our children and that children spend too much time at school. There were therefore need, somebody observed, for a whole range of dynamics, including the reduction of responsibilities entrusted to teachers. On one TV episode, somebody noted that teen violence was caused by a lack of self-worth, a lack of belonging, and low self-esteem. One lady said she was going to tell her children this: "I'm sorry I wasn't as tough with you as I should have been." Another rather bemusing submission was by a female who said she had decided on taking her sons to a respectable father figure for them to emulate him. From this could be discerned or gleaned the familiar psychological commentary and platitudes. Not that the suggestions or recommendations were unreasonable. It mostly sounded like rehashed fiddling at the margins or surface of the problem. Also, we may hear from time to time people expressing bewilderment when, for instance, someone rapes and possibly murders a young woman. Why? Many ask in bafflement, why would anybody do this to a 21-year-old girl? We are shocked by such things, including the other cruelties and indignities cited above, because of our reluctance to see the shady outline in the outlook of arguably urbane, sophisticated men and women. The atypical disorder in question here is perhaps best encapsulated in what a psychologist may say of schizophrenia. The patient is ill, yet the microscope won't reveal anything wrong. The age-old problem why we seem unable to exert ourselves well persists to this day. Every human being is, in one way or another, entangled in the odd universal handicap we are concerned with here. As I have already stated, it isn't helpful in the matter at hand to talk about the psyche or render formulations about it when we barely know what it is. Still, it would be similarly virtuous to anchor a person's sense of normality, or for that matter, inner well-being, on statistics and graphs of the sort rendered above. Undeniably, there is a link between the brain and our mentalities or behavior, a connection that may well be scientifically investigated. However, as previously noted, that approach is tenuous with regard to unveiling the psychological levers or inner architecture that a person may consciously and deliberately engage for wholesome self-direction. Still, it is doubtful that peering at a bird's brain or that of a lab rat can elicit a firm, if not personal and practical answer to the issue at hand. What is patently clear, though, is this: if man is a problem to himself, then the answer must lie within his unique constitution or makeup as a human being. And so we may again ask, beyond man's physical form, is there no shared, immutable element between the ancients and the modern? A constancy upon which hinges the entire range of human experience. Doesn't there exist something within man which is not merely programming about what reality is? Something beyond the myths or cultural constructs that are conveniently adopted or handed down to us through our growing process. Yes, such a thing exists, and I squarely put the finger on this profound reality: consciousness. The answer has always existed under our noses, yet for all that consciousness is, plus the vast amount of literature on the subject, sadly little is grasped of it. I am afraid scholars of consciousness today, even with all the available brain imaging techniques, hardly differ from Dr. Harris, whom we referred to earlier, Dr. Harris tilted to the burgeoning mentality at his time of conflating mental processes with the electrochemical brain activity. In its barefaced form, that mentality holds that the psyche or mind or whatever they label it could be discerned by examining the gray matter between our ears. Steven Pinker's assertion that the mind is what the brain does, the mind is what the brain does, somewhat typifies the above-mentioned mentality. Besides, such mentality calls up the Marxist reductive view of man's mental or psychological aspects. The Marxist view, as previously referenced, is concisely stated by Maurice Comforth, and I will here paraphrase: mind, from which emanates people's conscious and intelligent activities, is the highest product of matter. We will recall we referred to that quote in the previous episode of the series. However, Keith Sutherland, writing in the Journal of Consciousness Studies, presents a divergent view. No amount of knowledge of the detailed workings of the brain will ever be able to explain human experience. Jensen, Anderson, and Robert Foreman observe so. We do not know how to think about consciousness, how it relates to the body, or how it might connect to anything beyond the body. Those two authors additionally add, we do not know if the final theory of consciousness will look like a formula, a brain diagram, a sentence, or sub-combination of the three, or something entirely different. We do not even know the correct questions to ask. Having looked at the divergent views on consciousness or man's inner life, it is crucial to appreciate here that a seemingly innocuous but potent inclination has firmly taken root since the Enlightenment from about the 16th century onward. That is the tendency to more or less equate reality with matter. What is physical or tactile came to be regarded as the natural world, the real world grasped via sensory perception. With the success of the spirit of science given to popular culture, the fallacy that human experience could be entirely encompassed or subsumed within notions of the natural world was engendered. And so, what barely fits into the logic of scientific realism, entailing material phenomena with the associated physical forces, motion, space and time, may well be dismissed as a primitive throwback or something tending toward the metaphysical pale. What I have just explained is something that I refer to as scientism in my book, Consciousness, You Are Your Voice. Because of the success of the spirit of science, the euphoria brimmed over and then more or less rendered matter the overarching yardstick or lens with which to view the entire human experience. Anyhow, against the backdrop of the aforementioned scientism, and furnished with only vague clues of what they grapple with, scholars of consciousness and other thinkers on a similar quest have tended to impose material notions upon the problem of consciousness and consequently pursue a false line of inquiry regarding the matter. There is a mismatch between what consciousness is and how the challenge of coming to grips with it has been approached from the physical or material perspective. And because the context of the problem is misconceived, it has not been possible to wrap minds around the issue. Carl F. Baines, we referred to him in the previous episode. Baines, who wrote the preface to Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul, came well within the precinct of answering the fundamental problem of consciousness when he put it that there are people who have experienced the soul as vividly as the body, and that it had manifested itself in ways not to be explained in terms of either traditional theology of materialism. In that regard, the appreciation of consciousness would not only override conventional notions regarding the spectrum of reality, it would also affirm that man may not achieve explicit inner awareness via the material lens. Therefore, it is crucial to vacate the material cocoon and the scientism with which the problem of consciousness has been approached until now. As I pointed out in the initial episode, the explanation of consciousness in this series is partly autobiographical. I would only have gotten to a good recovery from certain searing experiences with a personal grasp of the essential human element, which is consciousness. This series attests to the preeminence of consciousness in human experience, an actuality that does not only vouch for itself, but also underpins human sentience or sensory perception and the associated thought processes. Consciousness is the one common denominator intrinsically relating to and yet rising above every terrain of man's outlook, cultural and otherwise. And it is indeed the fulcrum upon which man's psychological well-being and a whole range of mental health issues revolve. Thank you for listening. The next episode of this series will focus on what consciousness is and how that actuality informs various aspects of our existence. See you then. Keep safe.